We are going to wrap up now with our final keynote conversation of the day. And it's a fantastic way to conclude the day. The Executive Director of the International Energy Agency, my friend, Dr. Fatih Birol. Fatih, as you all know, heads the IEA, has had a career that spans more than 20 years at the IEA and is one of the world's most preeminent voices on all things related to energy. And it's really a special treat to have Fatih here to conclude the celebration of our 5th anniversary Global Energy Summit, because his friendship and counsel has been really meaningful to me and to all of us who've built the Energy Center over the last several years. If Fatih's with us, you know it's a special occasion, whether it's our 5th anniversary or the 100th episode of our podcast, for which he was the guest, where I interviewed him in his native country of Turkey. So with that, let me invite Fatih to please come out and join me on stage. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Fatih Birol to Colombia.
Oh, this is my football team, by the way, just that you know.
That's free to make you comfortable.
Thank you.
And a small present.
Thanks very much.
Because for those of you who have followed the Center on Global Energy Policy, you know that every time Fatih joins us at Colombia, I don another article of Galatasaray clothing, and then he promises to come back if I do something else.
Yes, thank
so we got you a pillow to make you comfortable and for you to take back with you.
Thank you very much, Jason. Thank you.
So we have a lot to talk about, and way more than we have time for. But there's so much happening in the energy world now, and you are responsible for analyzing, understanding, and projecting all of it. I want to ask you about last year. In 2014, 15, and 16, global greenhouse gas emissions were flat. The IEA wrote about the potential decoupling of economic growth and emissions. And then last year, greenhouse gas emissions rose again 1.4%. So is there a decoupling happening? Is there an energy transition underway or not?
Now, there are, first of all, mixed signals. Some countries do much better than the other countries. And I can tell you that when we look at the numbers, we are a numbers organization, data organization. The champion of reducing CO2 emissions in the world is United States, by far. And we see, for example, some other countries in Europe where the climate policies are at the top of the government agenda. We see an increase in the CO2 emissions. So there are mixed views there, mixed numbers. One thing I want to underline about last year is the coal emissions and coal consumption. Coal consumption, after 2 years decline globally, last year we see an increase, a significant increase, mainly coming from Asia and mainly from power sector, electricity generation. So this is one of the main drivers of the increase in the emissions and slowing down of energy efficiency improvements as a result of lower energy prices. So this is the picture we see, and when we look at those trends, whether or not these trends are in line with the Paris goals, absolutely not even close to that.
Do you mean 2 degrees, or you mean the Paris targets of 2025, or both?
2 degrees, we are far from 2 degrees, and we may be even far from the NDCs, which are not even in line with the 2 degrees target. So, to sum up, last year was a year where we saw a significant increase of fossil fuels, oil, gas, and coal. Also, renewables increased substantially. Energy efficiency improvements were very poor, and as a result of that, we have seen the global CO2 emissions increase again.
Now, as you said, the U.S. saw emissions decline faster than any other country. The U.S. has seen emissions drop significantly in the last decade. We've done analysis, IEA has done analysis, the primary driver, not the only, but the primary driver, I think, being cheap natural gas. I thought it was interesting that the IEA pointed out that last year, the primary driver of the U.S. decline was renewables growth. Yeah. Yes, natural gas played a role, but the primary driver was renewables. Is that a signal about what we should expect in the future?
Yes, when U.S. emissions have been declining, And until 2017, the main driver of the decline of emissions were shale gas replacing coal. But last year, the main driver was strong growth in wind and strong growth in solar power. So this is something that we need to take note. And it is not only shale gas that brought the good news, it is also the renewable energies.
So is the U.S. on track to meet its NDCs, to see continued decarbonization just from market forces alone, or is policy needed?
I think the market forces, market dynamics are very strong. And if it continues like that, this is definitely good news for the U.S. and for the rest of the world.
We saw global oil demand rise strongly last year, 1.6%. That was more than twice the decadal average. At the same time, we are talking a lot about when peak oil is coming. So when is peak oil overhyped? Peak oil demand, I mean.
This is one of my favorite topics. And this is, I think, I am very amazed. I don't know if we have journalists here who are so much, and also NGOs, tweets and everything, who are so much, such a strong role in the discussion of oil and become a part of the oil debate in addition to supply, demand, prices, those tweets. Look, when we look at the old debate on the peak oil demand is focused on electric cars. I mean, the cars alone, all the passenger cars, only 25% of the global oil consumption. The growth is coming from trucks, jets, and petrochemical industry. These are the drivers. And the dent that the EVs are making is very, very small. I'll give you one example. The people say, I mean, these electric cars discussion colleagues, as a result of electric car penetration, we are going to see a peak oil demand. Okay, everybody has its own view, we all respect it. And the year they say it, the year we have electric car record sales, 1 out of 100 cars sold in the world were electric cars, 99 internal combustion engines. And we have calculated that not even 1 out of 100, but even if every second car sold was an electric car, global oil demand will still continue to grow. Not 1 out of 100, but 50 out of 100, I mean, every second car. Because the demand growth is not coming from cars. Today, 1/3 of the global oil demand growth comes from the Asian trucks only. Petrochemicals, we are just making a major report on petrochemicals. It's a major driver of oil demand growth. So, just to look at the electric car sales and to say that we are coming to the end of oil, or we are going to see a peak oil demand is, I believe, a very, very wrong discussion.
So what are the differences in the projections that find peak oil demand coming as soon as 2025 versus what the IEA projects? Are they in the pace of electric vehicle deployment? Are they about GDP growth, population growth? What are the main differences in those projections?
I think I don't want to blame anybody. Everybody is entitled to make his or her own forecast. But I think the electric car penetration, when you look at our numbers show a strong penetration of electric cars as a result of declining battery costs and government subsidies. I think in my view, the main difference may be perhaps some colleagues do not look at the other drivers of oil demand growth, what's happening there, which modes such as the petrochemicals, trucks, jets, the ships, what are their contribution. It requires a much, much granular way of looking at those demand components.
I want to move on to other things, but just quickly, do you see something that could change the outlook on trucks, whether it's electrification or something else?
I think what could change is more than electrification, this is a bit longer term, to put some fuel efficiency standards. In terms of cars, today, more than 50 countries in the world have fuel efficiency standards. You discussed with a few minutes ago with Deputy Secretary General Dan Buriet about the CAFE standards. Mm-hmm. Now, more than 50 countries have car efficiency standards, but only 4 countries have efficiency standards for trucks. Only 4 countries. And they don't have, and therefore the efficiency is very, very low. putting some efficiency standards there would definitely help, and it's much easier, much short-term and very effective way of slowing down the oil demand growth there.
Yeah, I think people underestimate how much higher fuel economy standards, even with internal combustion engines, can affect oil demand growth. We talk a lot about electrification. There was something in the New York Times earlier this week that I wanted to get you to respond to, a column by Paul Krugman. And then he wrote something, I'm going to read what he wrote, and I want you to respond. He wrote, "There's no longer any reason to believe that it would be hard to drastically decarbonize the economy. Indeed, there's no reason to believe that doing so would impose any significant economic cost. The realistic debate is about how hard it will be to get from 80 to 100% decarbonization." Can you respond to that?
I don't know what is his time frame, but to have a 80 to 100% decarbonization without any economic cost is, for me, difficult to agree
I think he was saying getting to 80 is we can do with existing technology, we can do at little cost to GDP. It's the rest that's hard. And I was wondering how you think about that.
Our numbers, our analysis show that there is still a lot of work to do, decarbonize the system, especially in Asia. Look, we talk about oil all the time when it comes to CO2 emissions, but a main issue we are facing is power sector, the coal in Asia, especially subcritical plants. In the United States, the average age of the coal plants is about 40 years old. And a coal plant is a 50 years of lifetime. Where it's 40 years old in average age in the United States. In Asia, it is 11 years old. They have still 40 years to run and return the money back. So they will not shut down the plants because we want, so in Paris or Geneva and so on, there is a lock-in infrastructure there. And if we want to shut down those plants earlier than their money is returned, it requires a significant amount of money, the cost. So I think to think that this without any pain, without any cost, we can go to 80%, 100% is a bit of a visionary article, but I think it requires a bit more pain in order to reach those numbers.
And as you mentioned, coal demand grew last year. Asia was an important part of that. At the same time, there's been a lot of attention paid to the increased stringency of policy in China to, say, phase out coal-fired boilers. Yes, is China moving away from coal or not?
I wouldn't say moving away from coal, but China is much more careful because of the local pollution in the cities. I'll tell you something. I mean, you quote a couple of very important numbers from our recent report on global energy and CO2 emissions. One thing is very important, in my view. When we discussed the gas here, China is entering the global gas markets as a giant importer now. 30% of the growth in gas, global gas, last year came from China alone. And this is because they are replacing coal by gas, especially in coastal areas, for heating, for industry and others.
So how much of that was driven by economics versus policy choices?
Most of them is policy. Most of them because putting a cap, because of the addressing the local pollution there. So what happened? As a result of this new policy, within 6 months of time, when China pushed the LNG prices in Asia Pacific jumped from $6 to $12. A movie we saw several years ago under the title of Oil. So this is we are going to see again. I hear the footsteps of China entering the global gas markets as a giant importer, and we will see more and more. And it comes at a time, it's a coincidence or not, at a time when we will see a lot of LNG coming from Australia, USA, etc. Plus, India. India is making major efforts in gas, in solar, in electrification of the country. In my view, it is one of the biggest success stories we have ever seen, that India is bringing electricity to 500 million people in about 10 years. Only 1 or 2 years of time, we will have a universal electricity access in India. In my view, one of the biggest victories of real policy making.
One of the things I thought was interesting, you mentioned gas prices nearly doubling in Asia in response to this increase in demand, and what we saw in the United States, which has recently started up LNG exports out of Sabine Pass. Many of the initial volumes went to South America. And then if you look at the end of the second half of last year, they all switched and went to Asia. That's how markets are supposed to work.
Exactly.
That in response to price signals, supply flows shift. As we see gas moving from pipeline increasingly taking to the water, how is that going to change the global gas market?
I tell you something. It's a very good news for 90% of the players in the market. So people are very much obsessed whether US will be able to export LNG to Europe. It's an important question, but in my view, it is not the most important question. The most important question is now Europeans have an alternative. This alternative, the real alternative, did not exist until recently. Alternative is there, and this helps the Europeans for negotiating the price to their geopolitical considerations. This is extremely important, and I hope everybody should appreciate this without just focusing, having a fix on the whether or not how many BCM will come from US. It is coming. It's coming to Poland. It's coming to Turkey. It is coming to the Mediterranean Sea. But as important as the volumes and BCMs, it is important that the alternative is now there. I find it very, very important. And also India, also China and Middle East. This is a very important development.
So what is that in 2011, IEA sort of famously wrote this, asked the question, I won't say it predicted because it was a question mark next to it, is there a golden age of gas coming? So what's the answer?
So our question was, are we entering a golden age of gas? My answer is slowly and surely. We are seeing this, and last year was the golden age, a golden year of gas. Gas demand increased very, very strongly, and we will see it with the China being on board. But there are two conditions. One, we shouldn't see price spikes in gas. Otherwise, it is easy to switch to coal in Asia. Second, methane emissions need to be taken under control. If we cannot keep the methane emissions under control, if we cannot find a solution to venting and flaring, then the total benefits of gas may not be as big as we think.
And the IEA in its most recent World Energy Outlook put a big report out about natural gas. There was a whole chapter on methane. Some people probably saw the Environmental Defense Fund just said it's spending $30 or $40 million to put a satellite into space to try to monitor and measure methane emissions around the world. Tell us what you found in that study about how big a problem global methane emissions is. We spent a lot of time in the US trying to understand that problem better. What does it look like globally and what can be done about it?
We don't have enough money to send the satellite as IEA, but what we do is we work with the companies, we work with the operators and the oilfield service companies, and we see that the venting and flaring is a big problem. And what is very important is, because you talk about the regulations, about half of the methane leakages can be fixed at zero or minus cost. What we need is the right regulation there. And you don't need to discover new technologies. Just with the existing technologies, but put the right regulation and the standards there. Some countries do better than the others. But I believe it is something that many companies are looking into that in the context of the oil and gas climate initiative of major international oil companies. And I believe this is an area which can be easily fixed because it is also for the benefits of the gas companies. If they want to present gas as an alternative to coal, they have to fix the methane emission problems. Otherwise, they will going to score their own goal. So they shouldn't do that. They shouldn't be so greedy because what we have found out is that on average, the cost of capital to nullify the methane emissions needs 7% additional investments, 7% additional investments to fix all the venting and flaring problems.
There's a question from the audience that I think is a good one. I want to get your, just if you could explain, you mentioned how the strongest growth in oil demand will be in petrochemicals. And to the extent that the concern people have with rising oil demand growth is greenhouse gas emissions, the question is about unburned oil. And can you explain what use of oil in petrochemicals means and how much of that leads to greenhouse gas emissions?
I think perhaps two things here, since we are in New York. First of all, I can tell you that the petrochemicals, together with trucks, are the major drivers. The world needs more and more plastic. Everything what we are using with the change of the society, change of economy, this means petrochemicals, this means oil demand growth. There's an iron link with economic growth and the petrochemical industry. And the problem is we have two major restrictions here. The efficiency of the petrochemical industry is already very high. To increase efficiency is difficult. Second, there are not many viable alternatives to oil, yes, as a fuel in the petchem industry. Second question, IOCs and the CO2 emissions. You know, there's a lot of discussion between the shareholders and IOCs. IOCs change or look like they are changing their portfolio strategies and so on. Now, I really appreciate the shareholders putting a pressure on the IOC's strategies, IOC's carbon footprint. This is all good. But once again, I think we put the projected is not the right place. We have calculated, Jason, that all IOC's oil production related emissions in the entire world that we make so much fuss out of it is not 40%, it's not 20%, it's not 10%. It is less than 4%. All this, the cover page of the newspapers here and elsewhere is focusing, discussing this 4%. And this, in fact, a small part of the 4%. Whereas 96%, where are these shareholders? Where are these newspapers? Why don't they look at the 96%, which is a very, very important part of the story? These coal plants, especially subcritical coal plants, built every day. And when you build a subcritical coal plant, it will be with you 50 years. I think we have to put the projector not only the places which is close to us, very convenient, but less convenient places where the real problems, tough problems are, not look at only the soft spots. Once again, I am all with the shareholders and the NGOs and so on, that the IOCs should be responsible producers and look at their carbon footprint, but we should have the same sensitivity, same care for the other, more tougher environments.
And I think part of the question also was getting at kind of the point that unlike, say, oil combusted in an internal combustion engine, that, you know, not all oil is combusted and results in emissions when it's converted into petrochemicals. Talk about, we see remarkably low bids emerging for investment in new solar and wind projects around the world. When you look at how renewables compete based on economics alone, and then tell me how they're doing with policy support, what do you see now, and how quickly is this continued change going to happen, that the costs are just falling more quickly than many expected, and we're seeing renewables win on the economics?
Renewables are going very strong. When I say renewables, solar and wind, even offshore wind in some countries in Europe don't need significant or any subsidies anymore. But I have to make two disclaimers about renewables. Number one, we are facing a major problem how to integrate the renewables to electricity systems now, given the variable nature of the renewables, solar and wind everywhere. In India, in China, in Europe, and how do we integrate them, and how to make sure that they are integrated in the best way, secure and economic way. It is not very easy. This is number one. Number two, when we say renewables are growing, but renewables are growing only or mainly in the power sector. Energy is not equal to power sector. There is a huge other parts, the transportation, buildings, industry. There is the penetration of renewables is very, very small. So therefore, in terms of renewables, in the power sector, there is a very strong penetration, but a challenge in terms of transmission and distribution lines. How do we integrate them? And second, how do we see renewables penetrating the non-power sector, such as industry, heat, households, and others? So the story with the renewables is not finished yet.
And how do you see the emergence and the pace of development in storage technologies that could increase electrification, either of transport or of renewables in the power sector?
I think there's a lot of effort there. There's a lot of money put by United States, by China, by India, by Europeans, but it will be very difficult to believe that in the next 4 or 5 years there will be a major breakthrough looking at the current commercial position of that.
The IEA in its most recent monthly report on oil monthly report said, I think they used the phrase that OPEC might be ready to declare mission accomplished in rebalancing the oil market. At the same time, you've also cautioned this tremendous surge in U.S. supply that we're going to see in 2018. So where are we with the oversupply situation now? What's the outlook with prices rising sharply in the last few weeks?
Again, we said mission accomplished, the question mark.
Right.
We are very fond of question marks. And the second one, after we said it, the next day, Mr. Trump said mission accomplished. This is not only
in a different
oil market,
context.
in a different market, yeah, in a different part of the world. What we have said is that we are seeing that the 5-year, the OECD stocks level are now, we are approaching to that. In May, we would come to the level that the Vienna Agreement countries wanted to reach when they start this adventure. From that point of view, mission is accomplished. It looks like that, if this is their target as they have declared. But what we are seeing is definitely markets are tightening, plus the geopolitical tensions around the world, Syria, Yemen, and so on, are giving additional boost to the prices. But I see as the major risk to the supply here today is more the Venezuela. What is happening in Venezuela, you know it very well as well, Jason. The Venezuelan oil production is halved compared to when Mr. Chavez took office. We have never seen in the history of oil such a big unplanned reduction of oil production, a country, as we all know here, with one of the richest oil reserves in the world.
They've been very committed to the OPEC cut, just involuntarily.
Yes, the idea was 100,000 barrels per day. The decline, it is now 4 times more than that.
And as I said, we'll see. I mean, I think the IEA may have 1.5 million barrels a day. I forget, the number on U.S. production growth. Just staggering numbers. Yes, exactly. How sustainable is that year on year?
I tell you, as you mentioned, we make monthly oil reports. It is one of the landmarks of oil market discussions. And when we revise the U.S. production numbers, I rarely see that we revise downwards. We revise upwards always, and we see that the second wave of U.S. shale is coming. And here, a warning to some of the producers. Some of the producers started to say, established producers, we want to see higher prices than what we see today. There's a speculation here and there. If we see sustained higher prices than current levels, there will be 2 effects. Number one, this U.S. shale or Brazilian offshore will be much stronger than we have now. Second, rather robust oil demand growth may well be weaker than what we assume as a result of high prices in a sustained way. So therefore, one should be careful what one wishes for, and I think one should see the 2 steps ahead of those considerations.
And Saudi Arabia, which had talked about sort of bringing inventories down, is increasingly talking about the need for prices to incentivize investment, to warning about sort of a price spike that could emerge in the next few years as a result of underinvestment and strong demand growth. Do you share that concern? And then to complement that, you mentioned a minute ago, you didn't quite understand some of the media headlines, the perceptions of peak oil demand. Are they connected? Is there a sense in which you think perceptions that we may be moving away from oil more quickly than at least the IEA thinks could reduce investment in the sector that could help bring about those kind of tight markets and price spikes?
First of all, we have clearly said that the current investment trends, and which is very, very weak. Second, strong oil demand growth, 1.5, 1.6. Third, a key issue that I can never communicate well, and we lose each year 3 million barrels per day in the aging fields. So this is a depletion. So it means every year we have to increase the production 3 million barrels per day in order to compensate the decline in existing fields, plus 1.5 for the meet the demand growth. So, and when you look at this 4.5, every year production needs to grow, plus the investment trends, we may well see some surprises 2021, 2022. This is number one. And therefore, we need investments. But you can have investments at the $70 in a very nice way across the world. You don't need higher prices than this investment to happen. Second, whether or not peak oil demand discussions help the investment not happening, I don't know. It may be, but I am a big supporter of everybody says what they want, to be honest with you. We don't want to put anybody, don't say this, you are right, don't categorize the people. But one should be very responsible when one puts the numbers. And this is, and we shouldn't believe all the numbers in the market today. There is a need to look at EBITDA below the headlines there, which is what IEA is doing. We are looking at all the numbers very carefully without getting too excited, but get the objective way without fear and favor, put the numbers there.
Now, you know, when you offer those projections and say things about the strength of U.S. production growth or about very strong oil demand growth, you've seen some who criticize IEA's projections, that it's too conservative, that it downplays the potential of clean energy technologies. What's your response to that?
In fact, to be honest with you, we have, I don't know which critic you mean, because we get so many critics, thanks God. This is from every side. It is makes us very strong and immune, I should say. This is very good. But now, what we are doing is, we are saying what is happening with the current policies. What we are not saying what we would like to see. There are two different things. I have to put there what is happening in the real markets. I cannot put there what I would like to see. This is not our job. What we are doing is this: with the current policies, we are ending up this. But if you don't like to go there, these are the alternatives: A, B, and C. Paris Agreement or the clean energy. We put also the alternatives. But I have to put there where we are going to end up with the current policies. It is the reason why IEA enjoys a big credibility from all the serious players in the markets, from the oil companies to governments in the Western world, in the emerging world, and elsewhere. This is what we are doing, and we are just saying where with the current plans, current policies, where are we heading at, and what are the implications of this path in terms of energy security, in terms of climate change, in terms of environment and investments.
You spoke yesterday at the United Nations about the Sustainable Development Goals. I know that's something that's near and dear to your heart. You've spoken often about the Sustainable Development Goals. And despite much progress, I think it's fair to say there's still a long way to go on energy access, and even further to go on access to clean cooking. The IEA projects that's going to continue to be true for a while to come. So why aren't we making more progress? What needs to be done?
In fact, we make progress, some countries and some not. In the year 2002, I again came to the United Nations. We make our first energy access report. At that time, we say there are 1.6 billion people who have no access to electricity. At that time, the electricity access problem was mainly in China, India, and Sub-Saharan Africa. China fixed this problem as of 2015. India is fixing this problem in 1 year or two. It's a big success of the Modi government. And now, as of today, we have 1 billion people still who have no access to electricity, and most of them are in Sub-Saharan Africa. Now, electricity access problem now becomes mainly Sub-Saharan Africa problem. 2 out of 3 people in Africa, they have no access to electricity. This is a shame. This is a real shame, because when you look at Africa today, it is the largest renewable resources: hydro, solar, geothermal, wind, huge gas resources, Nigeria to other side of Africa, Mozambique, Tanzania, and the others. And now, but I am very excited because I see many African countries, governments are taking the access issue seriously at a time when the cost of renewables are going down. So there's a good match there. The political determination comes at a time when the cost of renewables, which is available, allowed in Africa, comes at the same time. So I'm really hopeful there. But lots of things to do. We have to learn from India. We have to learn from China, from other countries, how they fix it. We have to focus now in Africa.
What's the role, I asked the Deputy Secretary about nuclear power. What do you think the role of nuclear is in meeting climate goals? Is it too expensive to compete? What's it going to take?
I believe we have to be, United States has to be very careful with nuclear power. Look, I will give you one number, and I am sure many of you know, there are many colleagues who came from the administration. United States has been the top nuclear power since 45 years. But recently, we don't see new nuclear additions in the United States, and there is a lot of early retirements. And Jason, only in 7 years of time, after 45 years, 50 years, China is overtaking the United States and will be the #1 nuclear power in the world. Okay, so there are today, every second nuclear plant built in the world is a Chinese one, followed by Russians and the others. So in my view, US, France, and the others have to be very careful to see what to do with their nuclear technology as an exporter, #1. Second, nuclear power in the countries where it is accepted can be a source of electricity generation without any interruption and without any CO2 emissions. But we have a problem of the first capital cost being, down payment being very high, and therefore there are options, the market-related options, and technology such as the small modular reactors. But I believe the fight against climate change, when we look at this, I believe there is definitely a role for nuclear power to play there.
We only have a few minutes left. I just wanted to ask you, you've prioritized expanding IEA membership. Can you talk, which was an institution formed among OECD countries, tell us how that's going and what's planned for the future?
So we were founded by Mr. Henry Kissinger in 1974 as an organization of the Western countries, US, Canada, European countries, Japan, Korea, and New Zealand, and it has been like that almost 40 years. And I was elected 2 years ago, and we have started 2 years ago with a strategy opening the doors of the IEA to emerging world. And in the last 2 years, we have now Mexico, China, India, Indonesia, Brazil, and Thailand, Singapore, and Morocco became part of the IEA family now. 2 years ago, IEA countries were accounting about 40% of the global energy consumption. And today, their share is higher than 70%. So our membership impact increased substantially because, why did we do that? Because of the reasons that we discussed. Oil demand is coming from there, gas demand, renewables, emissions, investments. Many American companies make more money in China and India than they do make in the United States. So it is the reason I believe IEA had to open the doors to the emerging world. And there are colleagues here like John Elkind and others who were very helpful to us to make this happen.
Thank you, Fatih, and I want to thank all of you for joining us this afternoon. Thanks to those of you who are watching online. We will have the video of this event and all of our sessions online in the near future. Look forward to seeing you at future events. John Elkind, when he moderated earlier, asked about what the complexity of the energy sector would look like in 5 years. And I think for a sector that's changing as rapidly as it is, where the amount of ambiguity, uncertainty is as high as it is, there's no lack of interesting things for us to study in the next 5 years at the Center on Global Energy Policy, and that future is up to all of us to shape. The people in this room are the ones making policy, are the ones deploying capital in this space, and are the students who in 5 years and 10 and 20 are going to be the leaders in this space.
May I also say that for everybody, just 30 more seconds. This is not planned. So I know Jason since many years. What he did with this center in the last 5 years, and I know how much he works. I'm a hard worker. I'm a really hard worker. Ask my staff. They always complain about this. And Jason is amazing. He made big magic here. And as they say in French, chapeau. Congratulations.
It was a team effort, but thank you. Thank you. It was a big team of people. Many of them are in this room today, and I'm very proud of what the center has achieved in the last 5 years, and even more excited about what's going to happen in the next 5, and look forward to having you be part of that journey with us. So thank you again for spending the day with us. Thank you, Fatih.